What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. Back live like we usually are. Daniel here, and joined at the desk by the Snap, Crackle, Pop to my Rice Krispies. It's a little weird. Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is that?
Yeah, how long have we been scraping the bottom of the barrel for analogies?
There's not a whole lot of wood left. Hey, I do what I can.
I'm impressed that it's lasted this long. I'll say that.
Yeah, I might have to start repeating myself and hope that no one notices. Again, we're excited you guys have us join us. If this is your first time, then welcome to the Collision Live.
Yep.
This is our weekly show where we argue and we just talk about stuff that's going on in culture. Always a lot going on, and kind of from a Christian perspective, try and engage with it, dialogue about it. I usually just pick a couple of kind of big topics, either topical or kind of more general about kind of entertainment and
figure out why you're wrong about all of it.
Yeah, and then tell you what you should think. But we could do, if you want to tell us what we should be thinking, jump into the comment section. Even if you're watching this video later and it's not live, let's have a conversation about some of these topics that at least we think are important for Christians to be engaged with. But what's going on this week? Anything special in the world of Sam Camp?
Well, not too much, other than just trying to sleep when and where I can, because we have a 3-week-old and a toddler, and so it's
She doesn't let you do that?
Well, not so much. No.
Yeah,
no,
little brat.
Frequent wake ups in the night, but other than that, just trying to keep my head above water, as they say. So
Yeah. Well,
until some sort of normalization happens.
Yeah, in like 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're in the whole Wordle craze, but I will just note that I got it in 2 guesses today. Which just ties
so what is that? Because I've seen a lot of people talking about this, and
so this is a simple.
I'm curious, but not enough to go figure it out.
Basically, you have, I think it's 5 or 6 guesses to guess a 5-letter word. That's the only hints you get. You put in letters. It tells you what letters are in the word or if they're the right spot. Yeah, and you just sort of try and guess it as quick as you can. My theory is if you guess it in 1 word, you're cheating or you're lucky. But if you guess it in 2 words, like I did this morning,
you're just smart.
Then you're just a smart person, which usually I get it in like 5.
So is it an app, I'm assuming?
No, it's just a website. New York Times bought it, so probably end up becoming an app that you pay for. But just Google Wordle and just try and keep up with me as I continue to crush it.
Plan to topple your high school
every morning. But the first part about our show, to kick things off like we always do, we got pop culture news. So here at the Collision Live, we like to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in culture, kind of the main stories of the week, things that we're excited about, things that we want to celebrate, things that make us cringe. And there are several things this week, a couple that I definitely do want to talk about. But to kick things off, the Oscar nominations just happened. I don't know how many people out there still are invested or care about this. They've been losing viewers very quickly, but announce all that. So, of course, there's all the discussion about what was snubbed, what wasn't. And I'm sure as we get closer to the Oscars, we'll probably end up talking about that here on the show. The next thing, Blade Runner, kind of the classic sci-fi movie that they brought back, featuring in his prime Harrison Ford, which you don't get much better than that. They just announced that the live action show, which is... makes total sense that they're making this. I think it's been fast-tracked, so that'll be coming out. I'm not sure when, but definitely excited for that. The Super Bowl happened. The best part about the Super Bowl for me, as someone that grew up in Canada, is the trailers for movies. But I know people were excited for it. It seemed like it was a good game. The halftime show, which I rarely care about and didn't care about this time either, but I did end up watching the replay of that. I know a lot of people were celebrating this, some of the nostalgia, if you're around our age, of who was performing for that. John Williams, the GOAT, the greatest composer. Oh, I'm skipping ahead. The Obi-Wan Kenobi show. Speaking of things, still Star Wars adjacent, they announced that the Obi-Wan Kenobi show will be releasing on, May 25th, which is the 45th anniversary of Star Wars, which is this super cool. So that is coming up soon, kind of a limited time series on Disney+. But speaking of John Williams again, the GOAT, here he is, looking as nice as ever. This guy turned 90 years old just a couple of days ago. He's still composing like amazing soundtracks. I thought we'd throw it up because there will be a day when he is not doing that. He's 90 years old, but he is... the composer of Jaws. So need I say more if you know what I'm into? And then we have a holy trinity to end off the pop culture news of Lord of the Rings news. The first one is that the rights for all the movies and the games and the books and all that, or I guess not the books, are just came up for sale. So I thought I'd throw that up for Sam. It is my birthday coming up in a couple weeks, so if you can scrape together a couple $1 billion, you can get the rights to make me some Lord of the Rings movies. And speaking of Lord of the Rings movies, War of the Rohirrim, they just announced or released sort of the first concept art for this. This is an anime Lord of the Rings thing, which didn't necessarily scream something that I would be excited for. But the images for this look fantastic, and it's another Lord of the Rings movie, so sign me up. So this thing's not coming until 2024. And the last thing, you knew I would have this in here, and I left it to the last most important moment. The War of the Rings, the first teaser for the upcoming Lord of the Rings show released during the Super Bowl. And this thing is just fantastic, and I love it. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in just a quick second. But that's all we got this week for pop culture news. So, any of this stand out to you? And
yeah, I mean, I'd say about all of it does. Like, it seems like there's a lot of great things to look forward to in pop culture. I do think you were mentioning that a lot of the original like set designers and writers and artists from the original Lord of the Rings movie are going to be used to do this anime series, which I think gives it a lot more clout and makes it way more interesting. So I'm excited about that. And obviously the Obi-Wan show is going to be hopefully really good.
Yeah, the kind of the Boba Fett show ended, kind of mixed reviews. I encourage you to check out our review here on our YouTube channel. Yeah. But they have another Star Wars show all lined up. Excited for that. But I will say, like I mentioned, the Rings of Power, the teaser trailer. I know for this online, it seems like people are kind of mixed opinions for this, which just means that some people are wrong because this thing looks amazing.
It does.
I am excited for this show. It is everything. We'll kind of get into it actually in the last topic, which I planned
well. It seems way more sort of adventure driven than I thought it would be, and so I'm very excited to see how that unfolds. And I'm glad that it's not. And I saw some snippets from like the producers of it and stuff, just saying how they're not trying to make it like a Game of Thrones knockoff, or like they're not going down the darker path of fantasy. So that's exciting. So
yeah,
more
I think
of
they
a
said
family.
It's, for a family,
the whole family.
That is my hope, that I can force my kids to watch this with me.
And I'll say I saw one tweet about the only thing I'll say about the halftime show. I did not watch it live nor the replay. Maybe I will, but it seems unlikely at this point. But somebody had tweeted about it saying that like, everyone born from like 85 to 95 was like thrilled to see that they got somebody other than like, the Eagles or, Aerosmith to play to the old crowd. And then like 10 seconds later, it's like, oh yeah, that's us now. Me and my wife watched this thing. We're the nostalgic class, I guess now.
Yeah, all these songs felt like growing up again. And it seemed like most people, I know that people had issues with maybe, like they always do, that some of the shocking or controversies of it, but it did feel good just to hear some of that nostalgic music. And again, there was also a football game that happened around that halftime show. Yeah. But something else that happened, kind of a big thing, or maybe not a big thing, depending on how romantic or cynical you are. Valentine's Day happened just yesterday. The day of hearts, the day where a bunch of guys go and stand in line and kind of feed the corporate machine by buying a bunch of identical looking overpriced chocolates and to make their significant others happy. But it was Valentine's Day, and so I thought it was it's a perfect time, I guess, to talk about a little love and romance. Not necessarily, dating tips with Sam, but just kind of more in terms of Hollywood. And because when you think of like the staples of like cinema, like romance has to be, like at the top or like near the top of just sort of all, films just sort of need to have romance. It's almost anytime there's, a movie getting cast, they have to look for like the significant or romantic interest. It's almost like inconceivable to get a movie these days that doesn't have like a a front and center romance or like some forced in thing to try and appeal to that. So it is. I think the way kind of Hollywood deals with romance, even if it's not like a romantic comedy movie, but just like even action movies and stuff have romance and stuff in it.
Yeah.
As a Christian, I think it is important to, as movies are probably like either the most prominent or at least like the loudest way that our culture kind of preaches its version and kind of gospel of what love is and what love looks like. So I thought we could kind of get into that. Like, what do we do? Like,
Yeah.
If that is sort of the encapsulation of like what our culture thinks about love, or like the idealized version of it, like,
Yeah.
is it a healthy thing? Like, are we getting led astray? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say we're getting led astray, to put it simply. Yeah, it's always like, I guess you could say like love in the movies is never like it just isn't reality. Like it's sort of a hyper realistic or hyper heightened version of maybe what one would experience, love or romance or what have you, or relationships even. And so, yeah, it's not at all like it's sort of setting expectations of the way things are supposed to unfold. I think just unrealistically high. That's sort of maybe a general statement about um, romance in Hollywood. And I'd say the other thing is that it's almost always exclusively focused on the more physical aspect of it, the more attraction aspect of romance or love, and way less on like the lifetime commitment side of love. And so that's sort of the focus point, and it always ends like, and you could even see it like in the Disney movies, princess movies and stuff. It always ends at the start of the romance basically. And so like you're never seeing like what is the romance 20 years on versus like, well, this is like, the honeymoon stage is always where it's like cut to credits.
Which I think is why like so many people will like allude to like Up, like the Pixar movie, as like one of the best romances like ever put to.
Oh yeah.
Like, that opening where it's just sort of mostly silent, and you kind of see them grow
Plus
old together.
That
and,
little, I can hear this tune that goes to it now. It's just so perfect.
Yeah, because it's just such a rarity to have not super young, super young, attractive, early honeymoon phase romance.
Yeah.
It is kind of a rarity, and like you said, this topic, not just because it was Valentine's Day, but it's been one that's been kind of in the cultural conversations. As far as like what is love and how do we depict that on the screen. And this is a conversation that's been going on for a little bit, but kind of some specific kind of characters speaking out on this in the last just a couple of days, and just sort of I guess like the sexual nature of the way that Hollywood shows romance. So Steven Soderbergh, kind of another one of those guys that just, you always have these old directors that just want to complain about Marvel movies because no one watches my auteur high cinema film, so it must, so Marvel movies are the problem.
It's not me,
it's not my movies. It's these kids these days don't know anything about the MCU. So he's kind of was doing one of those talks, and he was complaining that, hey, no one in Marvel movies ever have sex. All these superheroes and that's just, for him that was a problem. We need to have more sex in our superhero movies. So James Gunn, who's directed some of these superhero movies, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and then he's directed some from the DC side of things. He has a Peacemaker show ongoing right now that I know a lot of people are enjoying, although I think it's quite raunchy. He came out with a tweet kind of in response to that, saying, well, actually, some of them are having sex. And here was his tweet, because I thought it was interesting. He said, it isn't necessary, because someone had criticized him, saying, is it really necessary? Like, call me a prude, but do we need like do we need to have like Iron Man having sex to be able to have a comic book movie? And he responded saying, it isn't necessary in any single story, but to have an entire kind of antiseptic, sexless film universe is a denial of who we are as human beings and how every single one of us got here. And again, he's not wrong about the last part.
Yeah.
That is how we got here. But it is interesting to me because it's just sort of this idea that it's impossible, kind of in Hollywood's eyes, to like conceive of romance and love without like the sexual, like that's such a front and center, like to not have that aspect in how you depict the romance is somehow to like be incomplete or like, a false view. Like, I don't know, like, is it,
yeah,
is
I
there
mean,
a reason for that? Like,
well, because sex sells, I think, is like maybe
that's awesome.
crudest bottom line of sort of how Hollywood looks at it. And that's what gets, unfortunately people into theaters. Um, and I think that's the sort of the easiest, shallowest part of romance to focus on is the sex part. And so I think for movies, it's just sort of it for whatever reason, it's that is sort of equated with love and romance. Like it's like you don't have love and romance without this. And okay, yes, technically that's likely, but like that isn't the only aspect of love, you know. And so I think it's just probably just an easy thing for movie producers to do, to
Well,
just
and
say,
it's sort
well,
of
let's
like
just,
it
you know,
becomes like a shorthand too. 'Cause I know
right.
like the Wheel of Time show, which ended up kind of being a little disappointing to me as a book reader. But like they have these characters, and like in the books, you have these like long drawn out romances, and you're in the characters'
Yeah.
heads, and you kind of see the ups and downs as they develop. Where like in a show, either just because they don't have enough time, or it's just easier to like, oh well, how do we show that these characters like have feelings? Like they have no chemistry. Either you just have them like speak it, say, I love you, or else you just show them in bed together, and like it's sort of like, see, they're in love, they're the romantic couple.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it paints this sort of very artificial, kind of almost the opposite of what like James Gunn is going for, where it's like this isn't even a romance, like this is sort of this physical
Yeah.
kind of shorthand to like what a relationship is. Um,
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's, you know, for whatever reason, the limitations of the medium, the unwillingness to explore alternatives for the industry, whatever it is, like it is an unfortunate direction, I think, that most of these movies end up going, and it just paints an unrealistic picture of sort of, you know, if you're sort of getting your love and relationship advice from movies, then like you're going to be likely very disappointed in real life.
you find out that it's not like a
Because the movies isn't real life.
and I would say kind of
As it happens.
maybe one of the last things before we move on is just that I think sometimes we almost we get like the flow of the river backwards, where we think that movies just sort of reflect what we've already decided in politics, or like the collective
Yeah.
kind of consciousness, where it kind of goes a lot of times goes the other way, where kind of Hollywood, especially like the way it depicts romances and kind of what's acceptable, what's the norm, kind of a lot of those start in like the movies, and then
Yeah.
those trickle down to viewers, and those viewers vote for politicians, and they bring it to the like it almost goes the other way of like like I think of like things like the same sex discussion, like
Oh yeah.
all of that started in like sci-fi shows and like TV episodes and stuff well before it got to like a political discussion or like a wider
Yeah.
and even kind of I think like what is like something like love is love, people say like polygamy right now isn't usually considered like in as an
Yeah.
acceptable, and I think part of it is like because it hasn't been kind of normalized in film, like you
in
don't
film. Yeah.
that doesn't sell like a the romantic comedy or whatever, the touching romance of the man and his 10 wives, like
Yeah.
they haven't because they haven't been able to sell
I haven't
that.
figured out how to sell that script yet.
Yeah, and the audiences weren't asking for that. Where some of the other romances aren't easier to sell, and especially the same sex stuff often gets like with Oscars and stuff, elevates them to kind of more serious art. So they've been able to kind of justify making a lot of those and kind of normalizing that. So I think it is, and I don't think all portrayals are like bad. Like there are
No.
good romances in Hollywood. Aragorn and Arwen in The Lord of the Rings, perfect romance, a mortal and an elf. It's kind of I feel like I relate.
What more do you need?
I feel like I relate to
Well,
that.
I do think that sort of, I think, shows just how, one of the main reasons why we do this show is because, pop culture is sort of upstream of politics and like life in a lot of ways. And so what you see coming up in movies and shows and what's happening in pop culture, maybe it seems completely unrelated to our life now or your life now, but eventually that will trickle into, talking about these things in sort of everyday life. And so it's very much can set the agenda for sort of how the society goes. And I think that's why it's such an important area for Christians, especially, to be involved with and not just consumers of or abstainers from. So.
Yeah, even like the same sex stuff. Like I have kids. I have two 7-year-olds, and like none of the shows I watched growing up ever dealt with that, or like, that was sort of taboo and even for Hollywood. Where now like my so like that came later, and I kind of wrestle with that. But like for my kids, like, even in like on Disney Plus and stuff, like these like cartoon, like dragon weird show, and like, searching for its lost love, and it ends up being like another female dragon. Like there's sort of some of that stuff is already like where my kids are just, I don't know if they necessarily grasp what's all going on necessarily, but but
it's already there.
That seed's already planted, that this is sort of normal. This is a beautiful kind of thing. So it's important. But let us know what you guys think. Either let us know your favorite Hollywood romances, if there are some good ones. I already shared mine. I know Sam, 50 Shades of Grey, spoke to him as this a touching romance. But let us know what your favorite romances are.
Twilight.
Hashtag Team Jacob. And just how you navigate that, how you kind of the way that the world maybe portrays kind of what healthy love is, and how that contrasts with like how Paul would describe love in the Bible. We'd love to hear about that. And something else we would love to hear about, or someone that we'd love to hear from, is Sam Camp in this week's Host Corner.
Well, Daniel, in sticking with the theme of love, I thought we would talk a little bit about Valentine's Day and its origins.
Romeo.
Buckle up. So we can go ahead and throw the timer up there. So I was doing a little digging on the interwebs, as one does, and it turns out there was a saint called Valentine back in the day, 2nd or 3rd century Rome, which is what Valentine's sort of traces its roots back to, and is actually a martyr, and so it's often referred to as the Feast of Saint Valentine. And he didn't become a saint until like AD 496. And so a lot of the early days was just celebration of, this saint giving his life for Christ. But then it wasn't until Geoffrey Chaucer mentioned Valentine's in a romantic way, about how all the birds come and find their mates in the springtime. And it wasn't, so that was like 14th century that it started to become equated with love and romance. So it just goes to show that give yourself enough centuries, and whatever story is popular at the time will eventually get skewed to mean something completely different. So that's my shtick on Valentine's.
Well, I feel enlightened. I was not familiar. I thought my alternative theory for the origins of Valentine's Day was that Walmart and Target got together and say, we got a lot of extra chocolate on the shelf. We got to sell it. Why don't we put it in some heart-shaped boxes, and then
voila,
and get some people to buy it. But it's sort of like St. Patrick's Day, so celebrate this great saint by just getting totally wasted.
Yeah, it all ultimately like sort of devolves into some sort of commercialized version that's just a total just sort of bastardization of what it was in the beginning. Like almost any holiday that you can see, or any sort of like feast day from like the Christian calendar way back, it all kind of becomes like, how can we sell more stuff?
Which again, I should just, before any of you guys think that I'm just totally unromantic and just callous, that I am all for Valentine's Day. I'm all for romance. I just am more cynical about the commercial side of it.
And I will. So, pro tip, I guess, for Valentine's specifically would be celebrate the day after, and then you get all that chocolate on a discount. So.
This sounds like a man who has been doing that for a couple of years. I was thinking of romance. Monty in the chat says, "You've Got Mail is the best rom-com." I haven't seen it. Have you?
I would probably have to agree with him, actually. I think that is I think it is probably one of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, I think. It is from the 90s. It is a classic, I will say.
Yeah, I'm not a rom-com person.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what my favorite rom-com would even be, but
I don't know that I have one, but I would just default to You've Got Mail, since Monty brought it up. Like, it's really good. It is, classic small-time bookstore, gets pushed out by giant Books A Million type overlords that goes in across the street, but they fall in love and find a way to make it work.
So if it's about bookstores, now it is romantic to me. Now you're speaking my first love. Hey, Monty seems like he's a guy that's got romance figured out, so we will
defer to
his expertise. But speaking of an area that I do have expertise on, maybe I don't have expertise on how to celebrate Valentine's Day, but I do know a thing or two about fantasy. That is my genre. I've published books on fantasy. I've read a lot of books on fantasy. I have several swords from fantastical movies hanging on my office wall.
That's true.
Maybe one too many, according to my wife. So I thought we'd talk about just sort of talk about fantasy and sort of at least one of the trends that stood out to me. And again, I will upfront admit this is totally a shameless way just to bring in the new Lord of the Rings teaser again. But one of the things that stood out in that teaser, if you guys haven't seen it, it's like a minute, is that it had this very like hopeful, like optimistic,
Yeah.
like, it's all about like wandering and discovery and like, it just it was just kind of refreshing to me. And I was trying to think like, why is that? And I think the reason is that normally like for fantasy and stuff, it's always like, it was a dark age.
Yeah.
Like the Empire was
The
doing
light
this
had
and,
almost gone out.
there was a time of death and despair, and like it's just so much of kind of fantasy. I think this movies in general, like if you include, which I would, like I think like comic book movies and stuff are fantasy, and even like Star Wars and like some of the space stuff is technically more fantasy than it is sci-fi. Like, but there's this it seems like there's this movement where it's all like, we've outgrown these like happy, cheerful fairy tales. Like now we want our fantasy to be like just super grim and like none of these worlds
anti-heroes.
Anti-heroes, and there is no good or bad. There's just power and like because like watching this Lord of the Rings teaser, it's like I want to go there. This looks like this great world. Like, but most fantasy worlds is like it's just like the most like hellish place imaginable. That it's like I would never want to go to this world. Like it's awful. There's no good guys. Like people just keep dying. Like why is that? Because I was thinking like The Witcher, Wheel of Time, the show at least, Game of Thrones, American Gods, like almost all of the recent like fantasy that I'm familiar with, like at least the big ones, are predominantly almost like anti-Tolkien. Like they're very not adventure-y, and it's very grim. Like, what do you think is sort of the drive behind some of that?
I don't know. It's hard to say, but I do think there is sort of this. I think as certain things have become more normalized, and as sort of what's acceptable in movies and TV progresses, then I think that's very much a natural outcome of that. Is that it's just going to get grittier and like harder and harder as they push the envelope more and more, rather than trying to tell just sort of epic tales of adventure. It's got to be like super dark or push the envelope in one way or another, and not so much focus on the story. Not to say that super dark movies or TV shows don't have good stories. They do, but I think there's also this element of like, well, we got to like push the envelope in some way or another, and sometimes making it as dark and dystopian as possible might be that envelope that you choose to push on.
Because this might be a bit of a if we can pull up my soapbox for me to step on and share a few thoughts. But there's this like, it seems to me at least, like this weird obsession with like darkness. Like darkness has almost become like shorthand for like, hey, this is more mature, this is better, this is
not for kids.
Almost every time there's like a sequel announced, like even like the Guardians of the Galaxy, the new one coming out. Speaking of James Gunn, like recently he was talking about the new one, and it's like this gonna be a lot darker. And
what is it? Fresh Prince. It's like
the
grittier version.
Yeah, it's sort of like everything needs to be darker, and like it's almost like that's just become the way that we talk about it. It's gonna be better, more adult and mature, and I think it's kind of this weird like where it's almost like we as a culture like have just accepted that like what's the most realistic is like darkness and like kind of optimism and like cheerfulness and like good guys and stuff is sort of like this left as like a fantasy for kids. And here's, I guess that'd be on my soapbox. Here's sort of my soapbox for that is like, a lot of people, because even like people criticize like Tolkien for that. Like, we need to be dark and more realistic. But like you have these people that are sitting like, with their 4K TV and like, like microwave food, like more luxury than like, an ancient king would have had.
Yeah.
Sitting there and like, but we need realistic, really dark, gritty, because life's so difficult. And like it's surrounded by luxury, not like Tolkien, who literally fought like in the world wars and like wrote his books from like a hospital bed, like as though he didn't understand the reality of how dark the world was. Like he was in it. Like a bunch of his best friends were killed in World War I. But it is sort of this like why do we think that like, the only thing that's sort of true is like if it's dark and gritty, and like if it's positive, then like that's just for kids.
Well, I think maybe two things are sort of at play. One is I think there's unfortunately more and more cynicism in the world, and so I think sort of these sort of darker themes and shows and movies, I think are in part like an outworking of just people's cynicism. Like they can be very, very cynical. Like even the good guy's not really that good, and like it's just a just a very cynical view of the world and of human nature, of people. And then I think also like maybe as luxury abounds in a society, like we want to be reminded of how like difficult things are. I don't know. That's just a total shot in the dark. But the more easy your life is, maybe the harder you want to see like difficult movies or movies that just show the grittiness of life because you have absolutely zero of it in your own. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's
like we're driving like our nice comforting car to like the movie theaters that all have like the recliner seats now,
Yeah.
and like big thing, and it's like life is hard. This is so dark. Like, yeah, like, and how do we get through such a miserable life, and we drive home in our nice comfortable home, and so I don't know. And again, I like dark. I tend to be one of the people that I like stories and like the bad guy wins and like it's not a happy ending. Like
I'm a huge fan of like depressing movies. Like I will say that. Like I love a good like everybody dies at the end. There is no hope. Like there's something about that speaks to me for some reason.
And I do think this is my crazy theory that is based on nothing but just my own speculation. But I do think you can maybe trace like some of this perception back to like Empire Strikes Back, because everyone sort of acknowledges that even if Return of the Jedi is the best Star Wars movie, that everyone seems to like acknowledge like the best made Star Wars is Empire Strikes Back, and people always talk about it being like the dark one, which really it isn't. Like it's maybe thematically dark. Like,
I mean,
it's
Hoth is very bright.
Yeah, and it's just like it's probably the funniest Star Wars movie ever made. Like it's definitely not like a depressing movie.
Yeah,
but it's almost like because that was like the best one, and it was the dark one, that we just sort of think now that like it has to be dark. Like even like the newer Star Wars movies are like way darker, and like the Wheel of Time, like the books aren't very dark, but like, they made the show and like they aged up all the characters and they're all just completely miserable and like their lives are horrible and they're abused and abandoned and like
it's a very I've watched, I don't think I've finished it, but I watched a few episodes and it is very like depressing and dark, and like
which is just such a contrast because like it's based on a book that's not that, but it's like nowadays
it has to be.
It's just, well, that's too. We got to show that we're not for children; we're for adults, and adulthood is just misery. And so I don't know. I think and maybe it's just that's a window for like where Christian storytellers can like not that because you can go the other way where it's just like most stuff made by Christian, maybe not most, but a lot of stuff like made by Christians is like the opposite of like the real dark. It's just like nothing bad happens, and sin is really just naughtiness, and like everything turns out perfect, and like.
The polar is just everything's happy, rainbows and butterflies.
It's like the classic like the Christian bookstores, right? Every cover is just some like peaceful like Amish lady in a field of grain or something like that. This is what life really is. It's this encouragement or whatever.
Flock of sheep on a sunny knoll.
So I don't think we're saying that, but I do think like there is, and maybe it's just that I'm an optimistic person, but it seems like there is more of, maybe it's because there is a lot of bad stuff and going on.
Yeah.
That it seems like people are more and more hungering a bit for like, just, hey, a story that doesn't just make us totally depressed. It does have, hey, we actually kind of like good guys that aren't actually just horrible people. Like,
it's like, he saved the village, but he's like, harboring some whatever, like just going to kill them all himself or something. I don't know. Like, but I do think, I think that's what gives me hope for the one, because Tolkien wrote it, but also like it just seems based on the trailer and everything I've read that the new Lord of the Rings series is going to be not that. Like, I mean, even though maybe it is like the rise of Sauron, so there'll be darkness, but
and Tolkien did a lot like I think Tolkien said like his main theme of his stories is death. Like it's all about immortality and dying. Like it wasn't like he just wrote all rainbows. But there always is sort of that like, which I think is his sort of Christian or his like Christian worldview coming out of like, like even in the worst times, like there's hope and there's optimism. And there's reason to keep going and fighting.
And I think that's the maybe the purpose that the darkness provides in a lot of these films is the fact that like there is always that remnant of hope, and I think that's the thing that people can latch onto, and I think that's what makes Lord of the Rings so great. Is like no matter how dark it gets, there's always that like sliver of hope and a bit of a chance that they're going to make it there and do what has to be done to sort of rid the world of darkness. And I think that's what people love about.
Yeah, as Gandalf would say, a fool's hope for things to turn out. But again, I think we just say, there's no shame in just enjoying a happy story. I don't think we need to, I think goodness and like optimism is just as real as darkness and some of that stuff. Like you don't need to pick one and just be, because I'm an adult, it has to be, I need to hate everything. But let us know what do you guys think? Are you guys tired of just sort of dark, dystopian things, or is that your jam? The new Batman, speaking of dark and dystopian, that's coming out in a couple of weeks, and the trailer for that thing looks fantastic, but obviously
looks very dark,
which is fine. I think it fits his character.
He's
he's like the poster child of like the dark and angsty. But let us know what you guys think. How do you balance that? Are you kind of hungry? Have you found any stories or movies that are a little more positive, kind of more classic throwback to when we didn't need to be grown-ups and be...
I'll just mention a couple of series that are the very opposite of dark. One is All Creatures Great and Small, which is based on the book All Creatures Great and Small. It's about a veterinarian in the Cotswolds of England. Need I say more? Another one is The Durrells of Corfu, which is based on a memoir from the boy in the show. And it's just like this British family that gets transplanted in the Isle of Corfu in Greece, and it's fantastic. And so if you need something uplifting, those are my two go-to. And you know what? Non-dark dystopian.
Maybe dark and gritty doesn't sound so bad after all. Maybe our people were on to something. But let us know in the comment section. Thanks, guys. We're not done yet. We do have one more part of our show this week at the Collision. Got actually a couple of things going on this week, different reviews and stuff. Encourage you to check out. Speaking of dark and gritty and death, which really it wasn't that, but it is a murder mystery. There is murder, Death in the Nile. I checked this movie out a couple of days ago. Wrote a review on our website, thecollision.org, if you want to read my review. Also filmed a review if you just want to watch me ramble about what I thought about this film. So check that out. And we also have a new article. And we talked about, I think, was it last week? We talked about like disaster movies. So I kind of did an article version of that of, what is the value? Is there any value to these like spectacle, the world's being destroyed movies? And kind of looked at least 4 ways that these movies actually can kind of enlighten or encourage or challenge Christians. So if you're into that kind of stuff, encourage you to check out that article and let me know what you think of it. Anything else kind of going on for us this week?
I think that's it. We'll have some more reviews. I think Uncharted, is that?
Yeah, that's coming out. So I'm seeing that in 2 days, so we should have the review for that on Friday at some point. Ish, maybe. If you don't see it, then check again on Saturday, and it should be there at some point, kind of based on the video game featuring the Spider-Man guy, Tom Holland. I haven't played the games. This movie looks dumb, but in like a National Treasure fun kind of dumb way. Like purposefully dumb. So I don't know. We'll see what I end up thinking about this. I'm okay with kind of that kind of dumb adventure craziness. So hopefully this movie is not terrible. But tune in later this weekend to find out what I thought of that. Yep. But any other?
I think that's it.
Hopefully Sam can get some more sleep. We should be back.
That would be nice.
Probably a pre-recorded episode next week, but we'll still be here at same time. So tune in and join us. But thanks for joining us this week, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.